Trump and Zelensky's fallout exposes a much bigger issue people can't ignore. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. After meeting with European leaders over the weekend, Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky says he's finally ready for a minerals deal with Trump, saying we need peace, not endless war. This followed Zelensky's disastrous meeting with Trump in the Oval Office last Friday. Even the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. couldn't stop cringing. Same, ma'am, same. There was no follow-up conference. As a matter of fact, Zelensky was booted out of the White House with no deal and no meal. Not even a happy meal to go. White House staff literally ate Zelensky's lunch instead. Ukrainian officials reportedly begged for a reset, but Trump wasn't having it. He put out a statement on Truth Social saying, "I have determined that President Zelensky is not ready for peace if America is involved. He can come back when he's ready for peace." The U.S. Treasury Secretary said this past Sunday that the mineral deal is not on the table now after Zelensky chose to blow that up. Much ink was spilled over the weekend debating who was to blame. I didn't immediately weigh in on it because on America Uncovered, we like to take time to actually look at an issue and analyze instead of just reacting. So some see this meeting as a shameful moment for Trump and America, and as a win for Putin. The New York Times says Trump is rootin' for Putin, because readers won't understand the gravity of the situation unless it has a nursery-style rhyme. Of course, the Trump is Putin's puppet line has been done to death, and never seems to factor in inconvenient facts, such as the 2018 NATO summit, where Trump warned that Germany would be a, quote, captive of Russia if it allowed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. They laughed at him. Today, the EU spends more on Russian oil and gas than on financial aid to Ukraine. People also tend to forget that under Trump, the U.S. military killed hundreds of Russian mercenaries in Syria. And let's not forget that before Trump left office, he approved $250 million in lethal aid to Ukraine. In fact, one of the first things the Biden administration did was freeze that. So let's take a look at what's happening now without the hysteria. This is why you come to America Uncovered. Leave your hysterical comments below. Trump was intent on signing a minerals deal. Prior to the meeting, he even backtracked from calling Zelensky a dictator.
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that.
Trump also said the U.S. would try to get Ukraine as much land back as possible. Of course, you may not have seen that in the New York Times because they had a hard time rhyming possible. That's so irresponsible. It's hardly impossible. It's a loss, and you'll find that my rhymes are real and unstoppable. In fact, the vibes between Trump and Zelensky seem positive.
Your soldiers have been unbelievably brave. We've given them great equipment, but somebody has to use the equipment. They've been unbelievably brave, and we give them great credit.
I think that if President or when he will stop Putin, if President Trump will bring peace to our country, I think he will be on this wall.
And you know nothing makes Trump happier than walls. Heck, Trump even talked of continuing to arm Ukraine.
Yeah, we're going to have arms to Ukraine, yeah, sure. Hopefully I won't have to send very much because hopefully we're going to have it finished.
Things were going fine, despite Zelensky making some comments that undermined Trump's agenda.
And of course, no compromises with the killer about our territories. This document, maybe other documents, it's a very good start, very good, but it will not enough to stop this person. And when he will go there, if we will not stay, you will fight. Your American soldiers, it doesn't matter, do you have ocean or not, your soldiers will fight.
The only way you could have undermined Trump's agenda anymore would be saying Putin would come across the ocean and up through the Gulf of Mexico. It was when Vance started talking about needing diplomacy that Zelensky decided to confront him, and things went downhill from there, quickly.
But you have nice ocean, and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
It didn't help that Zelensky was apparently caught by some saying something rather unpleasant in Ukrainian in the Oval Office.
Is you bring people.
Whether that was an intended jab at Vance or just a frustrated cry in general, that's for you to decide. But Zelensky was understandably worried about Putin breaking promises. There's definitely a long history of that. Zelensky is absolutely right that Putin has violated ceasefires. Why would he think that would change now? However, This was supposed to be about Zelensky signing a mineral deal, which would have helped Ukraine out. It would have given the U.S. a vested interest and a tangible reason to defend Ukraine and deter Russian aggression. But Zelensky came into the Oval Office wanting to get a security guarantee from the U.S. before a deal, even though he very likely knew that the U.S. was not interested in escalating conflict with Russia. The U.S. didn't want to get up on a high horse, since that's more of Putin's thing. But who could blame Zelensky? The U.S. reportedly promised security guarantees after Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal, and yet in 2014, when the invasion of Crimea happened, the U.S. rejected military assistance out of fear of escalation. But whatever valid points Zelensky had, he ended up antagonizing Trump and Vance, and this was probably not going to help, especially since he's the one asking for aid. According to Secretary of State Marco Rubio, there was an understanding that Zelensky was not to go to D.C. to lecture about diplomacy not working. It was a formality for getting the mineral deal signed. Now, it's possible Zelensky's constant calls for regaining all of Ukraine's territory, whether realistic or not, is meant to keep the country's morale up and the soldiers fighting on. That's why even after meeting with European leaders and saying he's ready for a minerals deal, Zelensky still insists on security guarantees. So right or wrong, if you were the leader of a country that had been wrongfully invaded and battered for years, who knows how you might respond. But the MAGA crowd increasingly is done with Ukraine. There are calls to pull out all U.S. support. Trump has to balance not just Ukraine, Putin, and the EU, but also his domestic base. The minerals deal struck a balance, but Zelensky kept postponing signing it.
And he said, sure, we want to do this deal. It makes all the sense in the world. The only thing is I need to run it through my legislative process. They have to approve it. I read 2 days later that Zelensky's out there saying, I rejected the deal. I told him, no way, that we're not doing that. Well, that's not what happened in that meeting.
President Zelensky and I had a very tough 45-minute meeting at a very loud decibel level, and I kept telling him, Mr. President, the purpose of this is to show the Russians there is no daylight between us. And at the end of the meeting, he said, well, I'm not signing this.
To be fair, we don't know exactly why Zelensky delayed, but it seemed to clash with Trump's interests. As a result of the Trump-Zelensky clash, many now claim there's a defining turn away from U.S. defense of democracies. So European leaders certainly took the opportunity to grandstand their credentials as defenders of democracy. They really got on a high horse, almost as high as this one. They rallied to Zelensky's side, sending tons of posts on X, showing their unwavering support for Ukraine, backed by action, not just words or tweets, they say. Ukraine can rely on Europe, just as much as Europe relies on Russian gas. Of course, they also took jabs at the U.S., saying Trump is no longer an ally. The German president went so far as to say, I would never have believed that we would ever have to defend Ukraine from the United States. Well, my grandpa would never have believed Germany would try to stop people from being subjugated. History is fun. And in a show of European solidarity, a Norwegian fuel supplier refused to supply fuel to U.S. forces over Ukraine. Here's a breakdown of NATO spending by Visual Capitalist. And that's the thing. No one is really serious about Ukraine. The EU can talk all at once about supporting Ukraine, but as long as they continue to be dependent on Russian energy, they're fueling Putin's invasion. Why is the EU sitting on $300 billion of frozen Russian assets? Many aren't happy with Trump and his mineral deal or trying to negotiate with Putin. But despite those security guarantees, when Russia invaded Crimea in 2014, the EU and the Obama administration did nothing. Up until now, all the support for Ukraine has just been enough to keep the war going forever.
I asked people, what is the European plan to end this war? I can tell you what one foreign minister told me, and I'm not going to say who it was, but I can tell you what one of them told me, and that is that the war goes on for another year, and at that point, Russia will feel so weakened that they'll beg for a peace.
That's a big if. So is Trump being too accommodating to Russia? Well, that's up to you to decide. But it's worth noting that the West has accommodated for much bigger and more ruthless regimes like the Soviet Union and China. During the Korean War, President Eisenhower opted to end it by splitting the Korean peninsula. The South Korean president at the time opposed that. That's why the truce was only signed by the US, North Korea, and China. Eisenhower understood that North Korea, with the support of China and the Soviet Union, were the aggressors. But he also knew that completely unifying Korea under the South would cost far more lives and resources, and in doing so, hinder U.S. broader efforts to counter Soviet influence globally. Just as the U.S. needs to worry about China today. Was the U.S. being too accommodating to the North Koreans, Chinese, and Soviet Union? You can judge. Was this abandonment of an ally like South Korea? Arguably not, because it at least helped South Korea survive to be the modern, prosperous democracy that it is today. In an ideal world for democracy and human rights advocates, North Korea would be completely out of the picture, and Russia would be completely out of Ukraine and pay war reparations. The question is that even doable? Or should we be trying to get the best realistic deal? It's like the saying, perfect is the enemy of good, which I think was said by Aristotle. And if you want to correct me on that, did you not listen to the quote, you perfectionist? Anyway, if Europe has any feasible options for ending the Ukraine war and preventing future wars, then by all means, please share. But what do you think? Leave your comments below with your expertly devised peace plan for Ukraine, because I think everyone is scrambling for ideas. And if you're willing to give aid, please help me survive by supplying me with coffee. Subscribe to our new premium website, AmericaUncovered.tv. Just click on this button that's been on the screen. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thank you for watching America Uncovered.